Household preparedness products usually sit inside a broad problem space: dependency on external infrastructure for water, power, food storage, medical supply, and communication. In normal conditions, that dependency stays mostly invisible because systems run quietly in the background. When systems fail, the immediate challenge is rarely a single thing missing. It is the loss of routines that depend on other routines. Refrigeration depends on power, sanitation depends on water pressure, cooking depends on fuel, information depends on networks, and purchasing depends on payment systems. Most effort-heavy approaches to preparedness treat the problem as a gear and logistics project. Typical paths include building a long checklist, buying specialized equipment, learning multiple skills at once, and creating a storage plan that can be maintained over time. These approaches can be thorough, but they also add ongoing work: inventory rotation, replacement cycles, maintenance, safe storage, and periodic training. In practice, the workload becomes the limiting factor. Plans start detailed and slowly become simplified, then partially abandoned, not because the goal changes, but because attention and time are finite. A second common approach is infrastructure-heavy: generators, solar and battery systems, water tanks, filtration hardware, hardened storage, and other installation solutions. These can be effective in some settings, but they bring upfront cost, setup complexity, and a reliance on correct configuration. They also introduce single points of failure: a missing adapter, a damaged inverter, a depleted fuel supply, or an overlooked maintenance step can reduce an expensive system into something that is present but not functioning. A third approach is skills first: learning preservation methods, manual cooking, water sourcing, and basic repairs. This style can reduce dependency on purchased equipment, but it requires practice and repetition. Without repetition, skill knowledge becomes theoretical. The friction here is not money. The friction is sustained learning time. Across all three, the same pattern shows up. The more comprehensive the plan becomes, the more it asks for ongoing management. For many households, the hardest part is not understanding what to do. The hardest part is building a structure that can still be followed months later, when urgency has faded and everyday life has resumed. That is the gap most simple blueprint products try to occupy. Not maximum depth, but a lower interaction plan that is easier to follow consistently. Joseph's Well is positioned as a preparedness-style information product, built around the idea of maintaining household resilience when normal infrastructure becomes unreliable. The core promise language used in marketing for products in this category often leans into high-stakes scenarios. That framing is not the useful part for evaluation. The useful part is the format, a packaged guide that attempts to compress a broad preparedness topic into a step-by-step structure. In practical terms, Joseph's Well appears to function like a structured manual or program rather than a physical device. The delivery is typically digital, sometimes paired with printable materials. The product is primarily information, instructions, checklists, diagrams, prioritization order, and suggested configurations. The scope in products like this usually spans multiple household systems, commonly water access and storage, cooking and heat alternatives, food stability without refrigeration, basic security practices, and general organization. Some versions include extra modules or bonuses that expand into related areas, such as home hardening, off-grid routines, or simplified medical storage planning. Whether those modules are included in Joseph's Well specifically is less important than recognizing the pattern. The core is a central guide, and the rest is supporting material. Conceptually, the framing is preparedness through routine design. Instead of trying to create an advanced technical setup, the product tends to emphasize methods that can work with minimal technology, minimal specialized parts, and a low learning curve. The emphasis is often on repeatable household systems rather than one-time purchases. That framing matters because it implies a trade, less customization, and less depth, in exchange for simpler execution. This category is not meant to replace professional engineering guidance, local regulations, or context-specific planning. It functions more like a curated baseline, a way to reduce decision fatigue and give a household a starting sequence. Information products like Joseph's Well are used in phases, not all at once. The first phase is reading and sorting, understanding what the guide claims to cover, what it prioritizes first, and what it assumes about living conditions. Most programs provide a first actions path that can be started without major purchases. This is the lowest effort entry point and is usually designed to create structure quickly. Time required is typically front-loaded. The initial pass through the material might take a few hours across one or more sessions, depending on length and complexity. A second pass is usually needed to translate the guidance into a household-specific plan. That translation is where the real-time cost appears, measuring storage space, identifying existing supplies, deciding what to ignore, and aligning roles across household members. Interaction level is moderate at the beginning and low afterward if the system is actually implemented. The intention is to move from research mode to maintenance mode. Maintenance mode typically includes periodic checks, simple rotation routines, and occasional updates to reflect seasonality or household changes. The success of the format depends on whether it can reduce recurring workload, not increase it. Repeatability is one of the main selling points of a structured guide. If the system is written in a way that can be rerun, such as repeating monthly checks, seasonal adjustments, or a standard inventory rhythm, then it functions less like a one-time course and more like a household operating procedure. Environmental needs depend on what the guide emphasizes. A resilience plan that relies on stored water, manual filtration, and alternate cooking will require physical space. If space is limited, the plan shifts from deep reserves to short-duration stability. If the guide assumes a yard or outbuilding, it may be less compatible with apartments. If it assumes access to bulk storage and a place to keep supplies away from heat, it will be easier to apply in some homes than others. Another practical requirement is tolerance for incomplete implementation. Most households do not implement every module. The product is typically used as a menu, some sections become adopted, routines, some remain reference material, and some are ignored. This is normal, and it is one reason the structure matters more than the total page count. Joseph's Well makes the most sense for a specific profile. Someone who wants a structured baseline plan, prefers low complexity, and is willing to follow a sequence rather than build a custom solution from scratch. The fit improves when the main constraint is time and decision fatigue rather than technical skill. This format tends to work for households that prefer step-by-step checklists over open-ended research, want to reduce ongoing management by adopting a small number of repeatable routines, are comfortable with good enough systems that trade optimization for consistency, have limited interest in building advanced setups, but still want a coherent plan. It also fits people who have already done some research and are tired of piecing together conflicting advice. In that case, the value is not novelty. The value is consolidation and prioritization. This format tends to be rejected by people who want highly customized plans tied to a specific property layout, climate, or risk model, already have advanced infrastructure, and want technical depth, calculations, or engineering-level detail, prefer learning through experimentation rather than following a preset system, dislike packaged one-program structures, and would rather build a modular plan from separate sources. A second rejection group includes people who expect a product like this to function like equipment. A guide can reduce confusion, but it cannot remove the reality that preparedness still requires some physical supplies, some storage space, and some maintenance. If the expectation is near zero effort, the format will disappoint. The product can lower effort compared to more complex approaches, but it cannot eliminate effort entirely. Compared to effort-heavy approaches, Joseph's well sits on the structured simplicity end of the spectrum. It contrasts with the two extremes commonly seen in preparedness. On one end are technical systems, high-capacity power setups, complex hardware, and integrated tools. These can provide capability, but they demand setup quality, ongoing maintenance, and troubleshooting ability. They also tend to be expensive. Their advantage is customization and potential depth. Their drawback is the workload and fragility of complex chains. On the other end are unstructured research paths, collecting information from videos, blogs, books, and forums. This can be low cost, and it can reach high expertise over time, but it requires constant decision-making. The hidden cost is attention. The plan becomes fragmented because the sources are not aligned, and the user becomes the integrator. The advantage is flexibility. The drawback is that many people never convert research into a stable routine. A packaged guide like Joseph's Well attempts to replace integration work with a predetermined sequence. That is the trade. It gives up some depth and some tailoring in exchange for ease of execution and consistency. When it works because it reduces the number of decisions required to take the next step. In comparison to skills-first approaches, it is usually less demanding in learning curve, but also less empowering in mastery. Skills-first requires practice and time, but it builds adaptability. A guide provides direction and reduces uncertainty, but it does not automatically build competence. It can support competence if it creates a routine that forces repetition, but it cannot substitute for repetition. In comparison to infrastructure-heavy solutions, it is less costly upfront and less dependent on a single device working correctly. However, it also cannot provide the same capacity that well-designed infrastructure can provide. The guide may describe ways to approximate capability with simple methods, but the ceiling is different. The practical way to evaluate this category is to treat it as an operating framework, a set of routines, priorities, and constraints. The question is not whether it sounds intense or reassuring. The question is whether the structure reduces workload enough that it can actually be maintained. Some households will prefer the reduced complexity and the clear sequence. Others will prefer a more technical build or a more customized plan. Neither preference is inherently better. They simply reflect different tolerances for effort, ambiguity, and ongoing maintenance. The product sits where many households eventually end up anyway, a middle path that avoids both advanced complexity and endless research, and instead tries to formalize a baseline system that can be repeated without constant reinvention. The rest depends on how much structure is needed, how much customization is expected, and how much ongoing management is realistic in a normal week.